Bill with the Late to Grid podcast. I am in the Atomic Autosports studio to bring you another episode of the podcast. And we are going to be talking about how to make the most of your HPDE events with Jason Kennedy from Auto Interests. And Jason is not in the studio with me because of a car-related matter. Jason, thanks for being back on the podcast. And let's talk about why your back hurts.
Sure. So in the process of swapping out my summer tires to winter tires, I could tell on Friday I kind of tweaked something. My back wasn't feeling quite right, but it was okay. Then Saturday morning, it really set in, and this thing in my low back decided it was just going to wrench itself up to 11 and just, make me miserable for a few days. So I go through this probably a couple times a year, and I don't entirely know why, but so this week's not been terribly productive. And so I'm virtual today so I can kind of play catch up as I'm recovering. So I'm probably 95% now, but not fun.
Now we're getting older, man. I guess that comes along with the age.
I guess so. If we could leave that part out, it'd be great.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you were on the podcast in January of 23. So when this episode airs, it'll be 2 years. And back on that episode, we talked about how a Taurus SHO started your motorsports journey. Remind the listeners a little bit about that car and how that got you into the sport.
Sure. So I didn't even know road courses existed as a, late teenager, 19-ish. I found this whole car club. I had a Ford Taurus at the time, and I wasn't particularly into cars, but I liked them, but I wasn't a person that, had like sports cars or anything at that time. And so I found this car club, and I found out that SHO existed. And I made the classic mistake that probably a lot of HPDEers make, where I thought I needed every modification under the sun before I could put this car on track. And, with a forum dedicated to the car, there's kind of the go-to set of things that you do and all that stuff. And all the forum people tell you, oh, you got to do everything and all that. So anyway, the Taurus Club put on a track day at Gingerman Raceway, and that's where it all started for me. And I fell in love with it. And so that's really where the origins of Auto Interest started, was kind of a core group out of the Taurus Club.
Did you live up in Michigan?
No. And in fact, the guy that put on the event, Bob Gervais, who unfortunately is no longer with us, but definitely was a great mentor to me. He lived in Rhode Island and came all the way from Rhode Island for this Gingerman thing.
Oh, wow. So from the Gingerman event in 2004, you started running events, and in 2009, it really started to grow. So for the listener, what is Auto Interest today? What do you guys do? How do you do it? Where do you do it?
We've kind of gone through a few evolutions, I would say, over the years. 2004 to 9, we were just figuring our life out, I guess I would say. And, we, as the group grew, and it wasn't just the tight core group of people that everybody knew, that started bringing new issues into play, where we had to, get a little more, put a little more rules in place and things like that. And nothing major. But then in 2009, it was kind of like, if we're really going to do this, let's do this, and let's actually create a new brand. And, we created the Auto Interest logo and all those different things and all that stuff. We started doing a little bit of advertising and some of that, and then it just kind of grew, and it was a very gradual process. But, after we really started growing, then we realized we needed a differentiator, and we got really serious about the actual E part of it, which is education, because at that time, it was kind of the Wild West of track days, and you still see some of that going on today, where inexperienced organizers will just rent a track and just make it a free-for-all. Hey, everybody come and do that. Well, it's reached a point where that's not really insurable anymore. And a lot of tracks are disallowing inexperienced event operators. And we realized early on that if we want to really make this a thing that's sustainable, we have to be serious and structured about what we're doing. So that's where the educational focus really came into play. And then, this year for 2025, I speak as though it's already there, but for our purposes, it is. We did have to transition to an actual membership model. And there's several reasons for that. So to drive with Auto Interest now, starting in 2025, you do have to purchase a membership. There are insurance reasons behind that, but there are also practical and more functional reasons. As the whole industry has evolved, tracks have really started layering on a lot of nickel and diming fees and just made things a lot more difficult. And so we had started to pass on fees like camping fees and small things like that onto drivers. And it was just kind of a mess to deal with the back office side of it. So we said, you know what, if we just charge a membership, we don't have to nickel and dime drivers. All that stuff's just covered. We absorb it, and it makes for a much better experience for the drivers. So that's kind of our latest generation is transitioning to a membership model. And we're looking at all the ways that we can add value to members, as we build this out.
Yeah, that's really exciting that now it's going to be membership, maybe even a little bit more exclusive feel to it. And nobody likes to be nickel and dimed. Let's talk about 2024. What was one funny or unexpected thing that happened during one of your events?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. 2024 was a really smooth season.
That's good.
Upon initial thought, nothing jumps out as strange or weird. I mean, there's always a lot of little things that happen that are kind of funny. I guess that one thing noteworthy that was doesn't happen every year was we did host the Boss Mustang reunion. That was always a really cool event. We did that 5 years ago for their 50th anniversary, and it was the 55th this year, even though somehow it feels like just yesterday was the last one.
What track did you do that
at? Pit Race.
Oh, wow. A great venue, a lot of places to park. How many cars showed up?
There were several hundred Boss cars there. I don't know the exact count, but I know that it was when they did the parade lap. I mean, we had the beginning and the end of the line to do a parade lap with the Boss cars was meeting each other at the end across 2.8 miles. So,
wow,
it was it was a really cool event to see a lot of the vintage cars, but also the more modern ones. There was the 2012s that are on a more modern platform that are quite capable on a road course. But there's a lot of survivor cars. There was some of the early VIN and even one of the pre-production cars there. And somehow these people have kept these things in great shape for decades. And it's really awesome to see that.
I have a couple more questions before you get into how to make the most of your HPDE event. However, before we get there, you talked about some of the things about 2025, membership-based. Any other big things happening in 2025 with Auto Interests?
Probably nothing that we're going to release just yet.
Okay.
I think there is likely to be a surprise new track added to the schedule. That it is one we visited before, but it's been a while. So we are working on something there. And just with the whole membership thing, again, focusing on adding value for our members. We've got some new technology coming that I think is going to make a lot of people happy. I won't say a whole lot more than that without giving it all away and over promising, because we're a lot of this is still in the works. We're in the heavy, off season work period. And a lot of people think that, when you run HPDEs, you just get an off season of, twiddling your thumbs, and that couldn't be further from the truth. We are frantically working to pull a lot of things together for next year that we want to build and add upon.
That's exciting. And I like to say there's no such thing as an off season.
No,
There's just different activities you have to do all year
exactly.
long. You hit on technology. I did want to talk about that. And in a broader sense, what makes auto interests different than other organizations that host track days and HPD events?
So we've definitely become very well known for our specialty in getting new drivers started. That's where I would say we're the absolute strongest from a functional and an operational perspective. We've got an incredible team of instructors that have really gotten their whole approach dialed in and supplemented with technology too. So we've tried to be a very technology forward organization. To my knowledge, we still have the best and most unique technology of any HPD in the country. I've not seen anybody that actually has a delineated curriculum with notes that instructors can put in and track all of that at a very granular level. There are some things that are kind of more broad brush and they're predefined like 6 categories and that's it. But ours actually takes the education part and really drills down into the core skills that the drivers should work on. And just the day of experience. I mean, we have all the integrated live schedule screens, text messaging communications. Our platform online makes it much easier to do business, register for events, keep track of your events. We store all the emergency medical information there if you choose to provide that. I mean, there's just a whole host of things that goes on the back end with technology that makes the event smooth that a lot of drivers are really even unaware that are there.
That's really cool. As a driver, can I go and put information or notes in as well?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
that's
So
huge.
you can put comments in there. And, probably one of the biggest advantages of that is the fact that if you work with an instructor at one event and then go to another event, the instructor you get the second time can pick up right from where the first instructor left off. And it makes it much more seamless and it lets the driver get more out of their day, right? Because they're not spending their time trying to get their instructor up to speed as to where they are. And those pairings are done ahead of time. So the instructors can actually see about a week before every event, they can go in and see who their students are. And that's all done digitally on the back end as well. So they already know who their students are, what cars are looking for, what skills the student wants to work on. The students have the opportunity to put in a hot list, we call it, where they can pick the things they want to work on. And then that instructor can start right into what's most important to that driver.
I think that's awesome. As someone who does HPD events, and I'm guilty of this, and I see other people guilty of it. You don't keep the notes in a consistent place. You don't remember lap times. You don't remember what you worked on. You're going from your car to maybe a classroom or a coaching session, and it's all verbal. And then you're done with the event, and next day you go back to work, and you're like, man, what do we talk about in that braking zone? So I think it's great that you have that all documented, and not only can I do it, but my instructor now or 3 years from now can see that. That's huge.
Yeah, and I've seen some. I mean, organizations. There's some that are better than others on actually focusing on the education piece, and there's plenty of them that do a good job with education. But supplemented with the technology, I think makes a huge difference. I mean, I've seen students bring in like paper logs of their HPDE and stuff. And it's like, well, nobody can see that until the day of. And then, I know of one instance where someone had it in their car and it blew out the window on the track. And it's like, those things don't happen in the digital systems.
Right. Well, now let's educate the listener here on how to have a great track day, a great HPDE event. And it all starts with how to prepare. So what's your advice for someone, whether it's their first event or their 50th event? What's the best way to prepare for a HPD event?
So my answer to this question has changed a little bit in recent times, and probably even since the last time we did the podcast together. And I actually would say that my answer now is the number one thing is a good attitude. And that means one that's open to learning and feedback and actually working collaboratively with an instructor. The biggest misconception we get is that, people think if they're an aggressive and fast driver on the highway that they're ready for the road course. And that has persisted for decades at this point, and it couldn't be further from the truth. So just bringing the right attitude to the track and all your predispositions that you have about how driving works and what performance driving is like, especially if you're a first timer, your eyes are going to be opened very wide as a first timer, especially. So, I mean, outside of a good attitude and readiness to learn, I would just say keep it simple. The pre-event guide that we send out always says focus on the key areas such as decent tires, not slicks for your first time, but decent tires. Flush your brake fluid, have decent brake pads. Don't do the cheapo auto parts store $20 special that'll disintegrate after a few sessions. Get a decent performance pad. It doesn't have to be something super aggressive for racing that takes 3 laps to warm up or anything like that. But good brakes, good tires, fresh fluids, keep it simple, and come to the track ready to learn.
One thing I'll throw in there is register early. Sign up so you don't get locked out. And you as the event planner want to know who all's coming.
Right. And with us being known for our first timer program, if I'm recalling correctly, as of roughly March, maybe April of 2024, every single one of our first timer spots were sold out before our season even started. So, that's what we're known for. That's what we're especially good at. And so it sells fast. If you want to get on track for the first time, with auto interests, we always recommend get on our website, create an account, get your membership, be ready to go. And then when we release the schedule, you'll have your pick of dates and events and tracks and all that stuff and get that booked early. And that's something that's easy for me to forget about. I focus on the mechanics of day of.
Yeah. So the next part, once you're preparing yourself, now you got to pack for the event. I guess let me start off with a question. What's the biggest thing people forget at your events? Maybe they come to they seek out one of your staff members and say, hey, do you have a blank? What is that?
Well, I'm trying to differentiate between food and car related things. We get asked for snacks a lot. So we don't really have snacks at the ready, but most of the tracks will have concessions open for lunch and things like that. Probably like sports drinks, though. Like a lot of people don't really realize how much it takes out of you to do an HPDE. It's very mentally intense, but it's relatively physically intense too. I mean, your adrenaline's going to get going, and there's a lot of things going on. You're with paying attention to all your inputs. I mean, you're using your hands, your feet, your core stabilization's activated when you're cornering and, all that kind of stuff. So it's, you feel like you had a workout after a session. And so, we have water available at our events, but we don't stock and carry like sports drinks and things like that. So a lot of people, after they've been active and through that, want their Gatorade or their body armor or whatever your choice of, that type of hydration drink is. So if you're a person that likes those, I'd encourage you to make sure you remember those.
Pack a cooler. So what else should somebody pack for an HPDE day?
I would recommend a small tool set. I mean, just at least a basic socket set and, that sort of thing. Cause it seems like not every car, but, probably less than half have some sort of minor mechanical of some kind that they need to adjust or check something. And it's just a lot of random little things, typically nothing major, but, if you're not handy at all, that's okay. I mean, we have some people that 100% rely on shops, perhaps yours, Bill, who, just say, here, prep my car. And, those people probably have less issues than some of the others. But I would just say some basic hand tools, maybe a floor jack, things like that. Cause if something sounds weird or something's not right and you got to get the car up in the air a little bit, we do, if you're going to bring a floor jack, remember your jack stands. We do have people that kind of patrol the paddock. And if we see someone under a car with no jack stands, we get pretty crazy about that.
I can imagine the insurance guy is not going to be happy about that, especially if there's a problem.
Yeah. So, and I mean, that's just a bad idea. So make sure you've got your jack stands and all that stuff. I mean, we have people that'll loan you those things if you really get in a pinch, but yeah, that's probably what I would say. I mean, also maybe a tote for all of your loose items. So just like a Rubbermaid bin or something like that. A lot of people forget that they have to have somewhere to put all the loose items that come out of their car. So, most people are taking their floor mats out, things like that. Also, people tend to have more junk in their car than they realize. So a tote for getting all that stuff out of there is a good idea. We try to be accommodating if it's like a kind of a wet day and someone needs somewhere to put things, but we don't have like unlimited garage space and everything. So, the totes really solve that problem.
Yeah. And I think that's a pro tip right there. Having a tote. One of the things I like to recommend is you have that tote, and that everything you need to take with you for your HPDE event is in that. So that could be your sunscreen. It could be your glass cleaner and towels. It could be a microfiber and some quick detailer to wipe off the car if it gets some rubber on it. Your torque wrench, your lug nut adapter, whatever you need and you're going to need is always in that tote. And that way, when you're done with the event, anything you used, you replace, and then that tote goes on the shelf until your next event. And that way there's no, I forgot this, I don't have this. And if folks are interested, there are downloadable forms on atomicautosports.com that help you pack for an HPD event and keep everything you need in that tote.
Yeah, and that's a great idea. It makes it simple. It simplifies the prep work and load out before your events and all that stuff.
Yeah, I have a picture somewhere. Maybe I'll post it. It's my Miata, and it is packed. One of those big sport umbrellas. I got my tote. I got a cooler. There's some other stuff, but to your point, you have to have everything organized in your paddock, and that's the next point I want to get to is organizing your paddock spot, because at your events they're full. You got everybody. A high car count, everyone's coming in and out, different sessions. How important is it to organize your paddock spot?
Well, even having, your tote and that type of thing, it does help you kind of claim your space, which is sort of a funny thing. But, people that don't have those and just kind of pile their stuff, like, we'll get annoyed sometimes that someone parked in their spot and it's like, well, we don't really have reserve spots and they're not really marked necessarily. So, having things conspicuously kind of saving your space. I mean, if you want to bring a couple of cones, you could even do that. But it's probably overkill, but, we have had people do that, but just, making sure that, I guess another random thing that comes to mind, if you have a manual transmission car, some wheel chocks or some blocks of wood, what the last thing you want to do if you've got a manual is come in from a hot session and just pull that parking brake. You can at minimum, you'll likely build up some pad material on your rotors that, makes that kind of have a vibration and doesn't feel very good. Worst case, you may weld your pad to your rotor and, ruin both of them, depending on how hot it got. But a couple of random wheel chocks in there, strategically positioned so that when you do come back in off the track, you can just line right up to them and stop against them and, put your car in neutral and leave it there. So that's another random thing to do. But, organizing your paddock space functionally with that type of thing in mind. And then also just kind of beware that, if things aren't sort of tucked to like the back of the area where you park, they may get run over. I mean, people run over their own stuff. You don't always see it if it's right down there by your wheels. So just try to keep the main area that you're parking clear.
In 2 sentences, tell me how somebody could not be coachable inside of a car.
Well, it all comes down to attitude in my mind. Um, there's people who seem to think they signed up for a free for all and not an actual learning environment. So it's really attitude. And we get some challenging students, and we have some instructors that are very skilled at kind of breaking through to those people, but that can make for a tough day for an instructor when somebody comes with a bad attitude and thinks that they're Mario Andretti or something.
Right. So that leads to another topic I want to talk about, which is what to do and not do while on the track. So again, an HPD event is you're supposed to be making yourself better. You're supposed to be learning. You're supposed to be in some ways getting faster, in other ways getting safer, getting more consistent. What are some best practices that folks should do during the day to make sure that they're doing that, getting better?
So number one, of course, is listening to your instructor and actually processing and absorbing what they're telling you. They do know what they're doing, I promise. And just kind of, it's almost a philosophical thing, but learning to slow down to go faster. Taking the time to go through the right motions and not just throwing the car into everything and things like that. Sometimes an instructor will slow you down to build the right muscle memory and practices that will gradually speed you up. I mean, I think probably everybody listening to this is going to have heard the saying that, smooth is fast, right? So you don't get smooth by just rushing into everything and throwing the car everywhere. You get smooth by being very purposeful and gradual and building, good practices as you go. So that's a big thing. And then I think the other one is that we struggle with some students is situational awareness. So it's an overall situational awareness. You've got to be, we've used sort of the teaching mechanism. We call it the figure eight, where if you can imagine kind of a sideways figure eight and the driver's field of view, where you're kind of glancing across your rear view mirror, your right side mirror, your left side mirror, your gauges. So you're just kind of doing that like figure eight with your eyes, glancing up and out through the windshield. All the major points to hit are looking up and out, rear view mirror, side mirrors, and gauges, and just kind of rotating through that. And making sure that you're aware of your surroundings and what your car's doing and all that kind of stuff. And some people will really just kind of target fixate on what's in front of them. That's relatively common, where they just start following the car in front of them. And, it might be a driver at a different skill level. It might be a completely different kind of car. If you've got rear wheel drive and the person in front of you is all wheel drive, your driving lines can be different a lot of times and things like that. So those are probably the big ones that come to mind.
So many people say you just have to get seat time. And I like to put a little asterisk on that and say with coaching, because I've been driving Nelson Ledges since 2008. And so this is going to air in 2025. A couple weekends ago, I ran a race and I realized where I was downshifting was the wrong spot. And I had people, and even after I posted a video of one of my laps, people commented and messaged me and said, don't downshift there. So plenty of seat time, no coaching. So to your point, you have to listen to the coaches, get the seat time, but have people tell you what you're doing right and where you need to improve.
Yeah. And I think sort of a misconception that comes with high performance driving is just people think, oh, I've been driving since I was 15 or 16 or whatever. Like, how much could there really be to learn? And it's just a different environment on the track. It's a different approach to driving, and all of that. And if people really think about more of even like the fitness industry, if you've ever had a personal trainer, think of the difference that can make. I mean, people can spend years in the gym and not really get any significant benefit out of it or get to their goals. And then when they hire a trainer that's watching their form and, watching their habits and holding them accountable and tracking their activities, it makes an entirely different experience out of it. And that's what I would equate what we do to. We're the personal trainers of performance driving.
So when we're at an event, whether it's one of your events or another event, and a driver is paired with a coach or has the ability to work with a coach, how should they be spending their time? What's the best way for them to work with a coach, both in the car and out of the car?
So that's a very personalized experience, and so our coaches are trained to try to personalize what they're doing to the needs of the driver. And the short answer is spend as much time with your coach as you can. And most of them are willing to spend as much time as you want. Take the opportunity to go ride in your instructor's car when they go out for their sessions. The vast majority of our instructors, will have their cars there and are happy to take people for ride-alongs. You'll pick up a lot of little golden nuggets there. But a lot of it can be, verbal too, just discussing, replaying what you've done, do a recap of your session, or don't be afraid to speak up and say, hey, I think I messed up, turn 2 here or something like that, and if something doesn't feel right to you or felt like you could do something better, bring it up. I mean, the coaches can't see every single thing. So even if you had a good line through somewhere, but it didn't feel right to you, say something, get the value that you can from having the time and FaceTime with your instructor.
And within your organization, how do you pair people up?
So we've got a couple different ways we look at that. And in fact, that's actually a piece of our technology that we're looking to improve this off season and do some automation with. But we have, and really it's we do it through our Trackside software, but somebody has to actually do that. In our case, most of the time it's Andrea that's on our staff, and she knows, which instructors are good with first timers and which cars they might be proficient in and things like that. So we have all of that data, and she kind of has to manually match that up with that data. So that's something that we're actually looking to automate to a certain extent throughout this off season. But it's based on the driver. So certain instructors do better with first time drivers than they do with more experienced drivers. It's also based on the vehicle. So if someone has a certain type of vehicle and we have someone available at that event that has, significant expertise with it, then we'll pair them accordingly. And some of your, higher end cars, supercars, things like that, when we get those, we do have people that are specialized in, different types of those vehicles with all their different driving modes and all the different features they have. So those are all the things that go into consideration. There's not a hard and fast rule, but those are kind of the variables that go into that.
Got it. And at an HPD event, it's a best practice that when you come off the track and maybe you've talked to your instructor, you should go hide inside your car. You shouldn't go and mingle and talk with other participants, right?
Right. Yeah. No. So, I mean, we've had people who have forged lifelong friendships at our events. It's not even people necessarily with similar cars, but, I know as a driver, there's nothing better than when you find that, similarly skilled driver, regardless of their vehicle, and you can kind of cat and mouse with them and, just have a great time on the track. And that's kind of what it's about. Once you get to learn and know and trust people, and you can kind of run in your little pack on the track with your friends, and have a good time with that. That's kind of what it's all about. As much as we worry about the safety and the teaching and all of that, like we want to, within those guardrails, let people just have a great time. And so, there's a ton of friendships made at the track, myself included, in those. And, I mean, you're not going to find a bad person to talk to or meet at the track.
Yeah. You never know what that person might share with you information wise. They might say, hey, you need to be a foot over to the right when you're going through that turn because they were behind you during the last session. Or someone else that owns the same make and model you may have insights for you on tire pressures or suspension upgrades when the time is right. And it's a lot more fun when there's more people on track. And you're right. I mean, the paddock is filled with awesome people, all with the same goal, to have fun on track.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And we work hard to curate that experience too. I mean, we've had our share of bad apples over the years, but we have our ways of handling those, and they just tend to not reappear. So, we try to be very cautious of how we handle things, and that people are there with the good attitudes that are going to, make positive contributions to the environment. And, we've worked hard over the years to build that and maintain the consistency of it.
So after an HPD event, you pack up the car, you high five all your buddies you just met and had a great time with, you thank your coach, you thank the staff, and you head home. What do you do then?
So I always encourage everyone, even after every session, to do a once over of their car, but you should do that when you get home as well. If you did put the track pads and the track tires on, you might, be swapping those out. You might be just at least checking, make sure your rotors aren't cracked, things like that. Make sure all your fluids are good. A lot of people do oil changes. I don't know that that's completely necessary, especially with some of the higher end, like synthetic oils and things now. But, a lot of people will flush fluids and things. That's probably a little overkill depending on your car. But that's, in general, just a once over of your car. You pushed it to the extreme. You've tested, some of its capabilities at the limit. And so it's time to just make sure everything's still okay. And most of the time it will be, but the one time that it's not, you want to make sure you catch it.
For sure. And also, if someone had data, maybe they had a catalyst or a race keeper or something, review that data. If somebody has a device like that, some sort of even an AIM device, is that something they could share with the coaching community you have as well, the coach they worked with, for further insights?
They can. So that gets into a little bit next level, I would say. So it's typically our more advanced drivers, maybe the higher end intermediates, and then into advanced drivers that are going to be using, data. The people that are looking for that extra tenth or a couple tenths of lap times and things like that, they're probably the ones that really need the data more than necessarily coaching. But, when we are coaching at the novice level, we're recovering, seconds of lap times, maybe even tens of seconds, very quickly. But in that, that doesn't require data to do that. But, recovering the more refined, goals at a higher level does require that. So there's a couple ways that we handle that. We do have group leaders for every group that are our more advanced instructors. If you want to bring data to them, their time is limited at an event to be able to do that, but we do have some that are pretty quick and can at least help you get on the right track with some things, or maybe find a couple things for you to work on. But if you really want to spend time in the data, at usually half of our events or more, we do have pro coaches available. One that we see pretty regularly is Tom O'Gorman. And he, for a nominal fee at the event, will do your data analysis. He can even do that offline. And we have other people too that we can connect drivers with if they really want somebody to do data analysis at a more in-depth level. But that's something that is definitely a valuable tool, but you're getting into kind of the next level of, advancement there.
Right. If someone wants to learn more about Auto Interest, becoming a member, what the organization's all about, where do they go?
Autointerest.com. That's with an S at the end. Our website has a ton of detailed information. You can probably spend a half an hour or more just really reading through everything. And there's a lot of aspects to the organization, a lot of different programs within it. I think you'll find the way that we do business is much different than most. We structure things in a very comprehensive and integrated way. So we have, a loyalty point system, and the skills management, and all these different things that layer in and connect to one another. So, please spend the time, check that out. If you like what you see, we'd love to have you drive with us. We don't turn anybody away, unless someone gets out of control on the track, but that's, few and far between. But, everyone's welcome to drive with us. We are a membership organization, but there's no, limiting criteria as to who can be a member. But yeah, check it out and read all of that. And, if you have questions, we have, full-time customer service during the week. That's also a differentiator with Auto Interests. Most of your HPDEs are kind of clubs or hobby groups that don't really, tend to things on a full-time basis. We do. So if you inquire with us, we're going to get back to you within a business day. There's not going to be weeks or days between emails and questions and things like that.
Awesome. So I have two more questions. The first one is there something we didn't talk about that you wanted to?
Thinking in, I guess, the broader stroke of just what we do as an organization. We have a sister company, Trackside Systems. So that is the software platform that we use. We built that originally for Auto Interests, and then due to requests and demand, started selling it to outside motorsports organizations. So, and we actually don't focus on the HPDE market with it. We're in drag strips, circle tracks, dirt racing organizations, tractor pulling, boat racing. We have organizations across almost every facet of motorsports that are now running our software platform. And we're trying to use what we've learned from Auto Interest to get those organizations engaged in more of the instructional and education and coaching and things like that. So we can provide, a great operating platform for them to sell their events and their tickets and marketing and all of those different things. But we're trying to apply the model of learning from Auto Interest into other areas of motorsports, with those organizations.
And one really cool aspect of your software platform is the track or the event organizer, it's theirs. Meaning they're not using a third party that they have to worry about that third party selling them or showing their participants or their spectators other events, taking them away from that drag strip, that circle track, that road course. It's theirs.
Right. So everything we do in Trackside is a private database. And in fact, I attribute the growth of Auto Interest to our strategy with that. There are plenty of platforms out there where you can go see a bunch of events from a bunch of different organizations, and the problem is it cannibalizes themselves against each other. So early on with Auto Interests, I decided, we're not going to use a platform that allows our competition to market to our customer base. Our customers should be our customers, and that philosophy translates directly to our own software business. So every Trackside customer has their own private database. There's no third parties that have access to that, and they can actually fully control the customer experience and all of that.
And if a listener wants to learn more about the Trackside software, where do they go to learn?
Tracksidesystems.com.
Beautiful. All right. We are at the last question. So if somebody is late to grid at an Auto Interest event, what happens? They get penalized, slapped on the wrist? What goes on?
Well, it's whatever Chrissy decides to do to them. So Chrissy has been our safety steward, and her and Gary run our grid. If you're late for your grid and you don't have your wristbands and things like that, you're not going to get on the track. So if you haven't gone through tech and checked in and all that, they're going to send you back to hospitality. We're going to have to give you the safety briefing and a recap of the driver meeting, get your credentials. So you're probably going to miss at least one session if you're late to the grid and don't have your stuff. Now, if you did go through the meeting and you have all your credentials and you're just a little late, we'll still let you on. That's not a problem. But
beautiful. Well, Jason, I want to thank you for being on the podcast again, sore back and all. giving the listener great advice on how to make the most of an HPD event.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Glad to be here.